Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for day 2 of the AV Club's Dialogues Decibels. I'm the editor-in-chief, Danette Chavez, and we're closing out our second day, which has kind of unofficially become this macabre or kind of horror-filled day with the cast and writers of Dead Lover. I'm going to start introducing everyone from my right. Grace Glowicki, Ben Petrie, Leah Doze, and Lowen Morrow. So yeah, like I said, it unofficially became the theme of the day, but it also kind of makes sense to wrap the day with a movie that's very much about how the end is kind of the beginning. So I was wondering if you could talk about, what inspired the story, because, there's that Mary Shelley quote at the beginning. I think people will recognize some of the Frankenstein elements, but what inspired the two of you to write it?
Yeah, I just really wanted to make a movie with friends, with the spirit of comedy, and I wanted to explore the horror genre. So it all just started by having conversations with 4 of my friends where we just were spitballing, kind of an impromptu writer's room kind of situation. One of them's a therapist, the other one's Ben, the other 2 are filmmakers. So the story was inspired by those conversations, which were super free associative. We'd talk about our dreams or people we remember from childhood and different random thoughts. So that's how the whole thing kind of came to be.
There are a lot of different, I think, influences at play. Like there are moments where it can be very surreal. There's obviously some horror. There's a lot of comedy. Like I'm thinking about the exchange where the gravedigger just keeps responding to all of her lover's questions with, "They're in the yard." And then when he asks, "Oh, so your family lives here in the house?" And she says, "No, they're in the yard." How, in this project and, just more broadly, how do you balance all of those different elements, Ben?
I don't know. I guess there are a lot of different minds that have their fingerprint on this movie. And I think a lot of the different elements come from just the different phases and stages of collaboration that happened. Probably in the development of this movie, there were more configurations of different groups of artists coming together to try and workshop scenes and ideas than in any other movie I've been involved in. And that was really Grace's process, was inviting people in who had an enthusiasm for the movie, and she felt like there was some kind of intuitive resonance there, and trusting that throwing all of those pieces into the cauldron, the brew that came out was going to be nicely balanced. So I think it was an intuitive process on Grace's part to combine people in ways that felt exciting to her.
I know, Leah and Lowen, you were maybe not as involved with the concept, but you made your way into this. I think you're both really game in what is a bizarre in a great way story. But I also know that you took a black box style to filming, and so I wondered if the two of you could talk about what that was like, if you'd ever shot a film that way before, and if there was maybe one element of your character that you kind of grabbed onto early on that guided you through all these curves and tone. And
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, I was involved in the sort of primordial soup as well to a certain degree. Like by the time I joined, there was already a script. But we workshopped the show in a studio like you would a theater show. And I'm a theater kid. I don't do a lot of film, but I'm mostly active in the theater world. And so Grace brought me in to kind of, as well as 2 other theater makers from Toronto, brought all of us in to bring in that theater element and like stage the scenes like you would a theater show. And it was in that process, some stuff changed around, and then Grace trusted me to bring me in, even though this isn't what I normally do. So I was involved a little bit in the development of this. And insofar as the characters, a really cool thing about the process was that we all in that rehearsal process got to play every character. So I got to play Gravedigger, I got to play Widower, I got to play the Creature, I got to play all the characters, as we all did, because then we can all see each other and get different energies from different people and see how it felt and how it played. And so when it came down to, like, who's gonna play what, Grace just asked. And so I was really fond of the Widower in large part because he's inspired. Well, he was already in the script, but I was sort of like, hey, can I play him a little differently than, it kind of be sort of foppish before. And then I was like, I have this Dungeons and Dragons character that I play. Can I just like try it like that? And Grace was like, yeah, give her, because that's kind of Grace's energy. Yeah, sure, try it. And it stuck. So I was really thrilled to be able to play that guy in this world.
Cheers. Over to you, bud. I also come from a theater background, so I had never shot anything like this, but it definitely, rehearsing and living in a more theatrical process was something that I'm not unfamiliar with, but that was new to me for film. So that was really, really exciting because I just love rehearsing. And then when Grace shared with me a version of the script and said, I'm shooting this, like, would you read it and do you want to be it? Are you interested in being in it? We were not formally cast, but you were open to what we were drawn to, and I was really drawn to the Creature, and I knew it was sort of like a democratic process of seeing what would be best for the piece and stuff. But I did say I'm really interested in this just because I was attracted to being able to do something raw and base and sexual and vulgar in a really in an extreme way, but also like in a not so nuanced way. Like Grace really wanted large theatrical, and so I felt like I didn't have to worry about naturalism or trying to be contained in any way. I felt a real invitation to tap into the inner weirdo that I have not had that invitation in film often, and it's something I really seek and was attracted to.
What was it, a year ago? Sorry, time means nothing anymore. About a year ago, we had Lisa Frankenstein. This is the second movie we're seeing where it's almost like you're kind of reclaiming the whole Frankenstein creation myth for the femmes. You know what I mean? I was wondering if you could talk about that. Because Frankenstein, it's Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, but so many of these adaptations are centered on men. And so I was wondering if it was at all part of the inspiration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, well, actually it's funny. I have to admit, I've never read Frankenstein. And actually Meg, my wonderful composer, one day brought over a Frankenstein book. And it's still on my desk, and I keep looking at it, being like, I should read that damn book. But my thinking was like, because I'm just, I'm 36, I've been around for this many years, and I've ingested so much about this Frankenstein story just from engaging with pop culture and talking to people and being in school and all this. And so I sort of intentionally decided to not go to the source, to not read the source material, and to see instead what just associations I naturally had picked up from just existing in our world. And the Gravedigger character really came first, and then we were like, oh, reanimation, and it kind of found its way. The project kind of found its way to Frankenstein, so it wasn't super intentional. I didn't set out to make a Frankenstein movie. It just kind of happened, and now I'm learning more about, oh my gosh, there's so much Frankenstein stuff happening right now. Our prosthetic artist went on after our movie to go work on Del Toro's Frankenstein in Toronto, and you keep hearing Brad, like there's all these different ones. So I think it's in the zeitgeist right now for whatever reason.
I think, to your point about it being in the zeitgeist is something that's pretty universal, is this idea that we're, to some extent, we kind of make up our partners, right? Like we may, even somebody we know very well, you're still kind of making things up about them to some extent, whether it's like an expectation or pretending that there isn't some glaring flaw. And so I was wondering if you could all talk about the different relationships, seeing as you all had a chance to play the characters, see the relationships from multiple sides. If you could all kind of talk about that idea of like what this might say about modern day relationships, even if there's this like old-fashioned setting.
Interesting. Well, for me, it was kind of an exploration of like anxious attachment, where you, like, the gravedigger has it in her mind that like no one else could ever possibly love her. So the one person that happened to, she had to hold on with like a white knuckling of delusion. So I think my character kind of felt like an exploration of that very common attachment style that you like hear about. It like has a name now. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I was thinking about it in a similar way. It's kind of a movie about the way that, well, maybe I'm not saying it is a movie about, but that idea that you want to cling on to a love that you have, even if it's dying in some way. You want to cling on to it. You don't want to lose it. But if you do let go of it, then you can kind of trust that love is going to grow somewhere else, or transfigure somewhere else, or transmute somewhere else. And yeah, kind of exploring the idea that you don't want to grip on so tightly to an object of your love, trying to control it, that it loses its life, and trusts that if you let it flow through you, it'll pop up somewhere else.
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think, as I think about it, I was really attracted to, with the creature, just the insatiability of a kind of carnal desire that was unfulfillable. And so the constant pursuit of filling that up was something I was really attracted to in its raw form. And then I guess also, like, as I think of it, the attraction to the unavailable, wanting what you can't have or what you're not supposed to have, that I think is a part of all of these characters, and it's maybe not all of them, but it definitely resonates for Creature, definitely for Gravedigger, and is something that is pretty human, even though, again, this piece is so off the wall and so non-normative, but there are these really basic things about our humanity that I think it does speak to, and that's one of them.
Yeah, all of what you said. Okay, I'm last. The thing that comes to mind for me is, like, it doesn't surprise me that Frankenstein is in the zeitgeist right now. Everybody lived in this horrible situation. We were all isolated and in lockdown, unable to live our best lives, and separated from our loved ones, and living in isolation and fear and no knowledge of what was to come. And I think that, like, a lot of the work that we're seeing now, of course, didn't start this year. It started years ago. And I think that, like, there's a lot of this quality to, like, reanimation that makes sense. This sense of, like, coming back to life. This sense of, like, re-energizing and, like, in these new strange forms. Like, I remember, like, re-emerging and being like, people, what's happening, and feeling like this creature, and I also think it speaks to the isolation that, like, basically all of these characters experience, maybe except for the, like, trios. There's a couple trios, like, where it's like you got, the gravedigger who's alone and rejected and isolated, and that breeds that desperation for connection that I think most of us have, and the widower, his love just died, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that, like, and then there's the isolation of, like, the cruelty that we can do to each other, that you see the gossips having, and it's just this. I think that there's these unconscious themes inside of all of us where this sort of narrative is just gonna pop out,
And, you said off the wall, non-normative. I really think my questions are maybe downplaying how delightfully strange this movie really is. It starts off, with the gravedigger, and then, like, you think it's as weird as it's gotten as weird as it's going to get, and then, you kind of don't want to look away. Can you all talk about maybe one of the most bizarre things that you shot during? Because again, I think, they think that we're having a little like Oprah talk maybe, where we're getting into our feelings, but it really is the most like delightfully strange setup.
Yeah, the weirdest thing for me that we shot, which is actually cut from the movie, was the prosthetic artist made a barf machine that had a really wide girth and a really like forceful speed. Thank
you.
I know, right?
Do it again.
He loves the barf machine apparently. So we shot this like puke scene where I like puked in front of, like knelt in front of the moon and puked like a wolf howling, but instead I had this giant girth of puke that went up like multi-feet in the air, and he made such a strong hydraulic that it hit the studio roof, and we were all erupting with laughter. So that was like the weirdest day, was the puke machine that got cut.
There's one scene, it's maybe not the weirdest content in the movie, but one of the weirdest moments shooting the movie was a simple scene where me and Grace's character are supposed to be swimming in the ocean, but we shot the movie all interiors with a very low budget, so we just had basically a kiddie pool filled with like 10 inches of water. And we had like black duvetine on the kiddie pool to make it look kind of bottomless. And me and Grace were just splashing around in like 5 square feet of water in this plastic pool as the crew was kind of gathered around us, giggling at us and watching us also be kind of semi-sensual and erotic with one another. And it was just one of the many moments in our relationship where you get to pause and think, this is so strange what we're doing together, and so lovely as well.
I remember being in the dressing room, removed from the black box space when that was happening, and all I heard was this like grooving
I think we had Al
music.
Green on.
Was it Al Green?
I think it was.
Okay, weird. It was just like this. Like I had FOMO. I was like, something's happening, and sure enough, I went, and this beautiful thing, and I was in the room for it. It was lovely. I think for me, I mean, the weirdest thing, I felt like we got so desensitized of how weird the film is through the process. So I'm like reliving it, and I am. You were saying earlier today, like it's just sex upon sex upon sex. And it kind of is, but I guess all the creature really does is just have orgasms, just over and over again. And so when I think of that, I'm like, oh yeah, I guess that's like kind of strange. And they're edited in the film, but they lasted several minutes, many of these, when we shot them. So they're these kind of deranged, hyperextended climaxes that are weird, but
I actually remember one of your most climactic climaxes in the movie that was multiple minutes long.
Was, yeah.
And at the end of the take, looking over, and the assistant costume designer, Margot, was crying. She was so moved by watching you have this public-facing experience.
Liberation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, what to choose from? I had pus thrown at my face, blood thrown at my face, water thrown at my face, dirt thrown at my face. I honestly, one of my favorite moments wasn't actually, well, that's not true. The funniest moment that was gross for me was like actually also in the makeup room. And I wasn't a part of this scene, but I was like getting made up for something, and they're like making this mixture and like testing its like consistency. And they're like, "Does this look like pussy juice?" And I was just like, "What the hell are you people doing?" And so I was just sitting there like you know when you like belly laugh, that like it was just one of those moments. So I think just oddly just sitting there watching them really seriously talk about the consistency of this pussy juice was a real highlight for me.
That is a much better note, I think, to end this on than alienation. But thank you so much for joining us, Dead Lover. Again, I think I got a little in my own feelings about this, especially when you brought up the idea of like, oh, right, like you're kind of, people were emerging from hibernation basically during the pandemic while you were working on this, and like, I forgot how to like just say hi to, you know what I mean? People would say hi and I'd be like, you're going to get me sick. But yeah, this is a much more fun note to end that on. Thank you so much for joining us. Dead Lover, everyone.
Thank you so much.